Yet again, Oda is on a legendary run with these chapters. Chapter 1152 gave us so many more answers to things we've been asking, and of course, as always, gave us even more questions. So let's break down this chapter page by page and go over what I found interesting and the theories that the community have been coming up with. Before we get into it, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and consider joining the Discord so you can have these conversations with me and the community all week long. So let's get it. Chapter 1152, a horrible day. Dark way to start off a chapter with that right there. But yet again, we have another Golden Harvest pilgrimage. When are these going to end? We are on volume 36 now. They teased us on chapter 1150 by saying this pilgrimage was complete because we are still getting it. That being said, I can see that this pilgrimage is showing how Wano is currently healing. Yamato has made their way across the country of Wano, talking to all the new daimyos who are all familiar faces for us, so I can see all the effort that Yamato's putting in. And of course, this does mean that Yamato is going to be important again later on in this series, and this is just simply setting it all up. Of course, in this cover photo, we are seeing Otama's Amigasha hat delivered to Kawamatsu, which I do love Kawamatsu. He's probably my favorite scabbard of them all, so it's cool to see him on a cover page again, but still, I'm kind of over this whole Yamato pilgrimage, so let's get into the meat of this chapter. I love that it starts off with Gaban letting Luffy know that he has Conqueror's Haki and he can use it against the Holy Knights. Now, is this a confirmation that this is the only way we can hurt the Holy Knights? No. But it is a confirmation of a way to hurt the Holy Knights, and that is crucial. Up until this point, we see them infinitely regenerating. Aside from the Joy Boy Haki Blast that we got in Egghead from Emmet, this is the first thing we've seen that could actually potentially do some permanent damage on these Holy Knights. Of course, we still have more questions because Gaban was able to cut Summers in half, and he wasn't healing until which point Imu arrived on Elbaf through Gunko. So it seems like there's some level of proximity that helps them heal. So maybe if we could hurt them far enough away from Imu, we could do some permanent damage. But these pages go on to have Loki saying, hey, undo my cuffs and let me help you guys out. You're going to need me for the battle that's ahead, and I think that's very true. Hajridin is incredibly skeptical of Loki because he is completely sold on the idea that Loki is an evil person. But this next scene makes me so happy since Zoro is my favorite character in One Piece. Gaban calls out the fact that Zoro does in fact have Conqueror's Haki. Now, for some reason, the One Piece community has been kind of split on the fact that Zoro may or may not have Conqueror's Haki, which I don't understand. Kaido directly said that he has the color of the Supreme King when Zoro landed a cut on him, so I think it's been confirmed since then, but either way, we have yet another clear-cut confirmation that Zoro is in fact using Conqueror's Haki. Unfortunately for Sanji, we got more confirmation that he absolutely is not using Conqueror's Haki. And if I'm being honest, I don't think Sanji's ever going to get it. It doesn't seem like he is that kind of person. And of course we know Conqueror's Haki is something you're born with. It's not like he can train for it anyway. The only other Straw Hat that's showing potential for Conqueror's Haki in my opinion is Jinbei, and I am pretty convinced that he's going to end up getting it. But of course, in classic Zoro fashion, he's completely unaware of what it is he's been using this whole time. And I love that Gaban takes this moment to actually scold Zoro. Zoro's always the one that ends up scolding Luffy when he's kind of getting out of hand, and in this moment, Gaban's doing the same to Zoro. How do you expect to support your captain, an Emperor of the Sea, without knowing that? I love that Zoro gets a taste of reality here, and I hope that this leads to Zoro really locking in on using his Conqueror's Haki more often. And obviously with the fights to come, he's going to need it. The arguing between Hajridin and Loki continues, with Loki saying that Elbaf has him, so he is there to protect it. And of course, Hajridin does not believe that for a second. But then in this next page, we get a panel that's going to continue stoking the fires of my least favorite question in the One Piece community right now. Luffy goes on to ask Loki if he will join the crew. And as I've been saying for chapters and chapters and chapters, Loki turns it down immediately because he said he would never be the henchman to a pipsqueak like Luffy. Loki is not the type of character to be led by another. He is a captain if anything, and even still he seems to be more of a solo artist than that. Now, do I think Loki is going to become a crucial ally to the Straw Hats? Without a doubt. It's even possible that he may join the Grand Fleet in his own regard. Hopefully, Loki and Hajridin can become the co-rulers of Elbaf, just like King Harold wanted them to do in the beginning. In my personal opinion, I think by the end of all of this, Loki is going to end up staying back on Elbaf to help them rebuild from all the destruction that happened. Currently in the story, Dory and Bragi have been completely demonized by Emu. Yarul is on the chopping block right now because Emu is using Dory, Bragi, and the other giants to go take his head. And if I'm being honest with you, I feel like he might not survive this situation. So even if we are able to repel Emu and get the Holy Knights off the island of Elbaf, I think they're going to need the power that Loki has to help bring them back together after all of this. But he's going to need his brother's support to gain the trust of all of the other civilians of Elbaf. Because again, everybody assumes him to be the bad guy when we all know that's not really the case. But the next crucial piece of this page is the fact that Hajradin notes that Luffy's instincts are telling him to trust Loki. You have to remember that Hajradin is part of Luffy's Grand Fleet. Hajradin trusts Luffy completely. So if Luffy's instincts are saying to trust Loki, that starts to tip Hajradin back on the side of Loki as well. And as we've seen time and time again, Luffy's instincts are on point. Continuing on from there, Gabon even says himself, go ahead and undo the chains for Loki. We're gonna need him. Hajradin goes on to list all of the crimes that Loki's been accused of, but even still, Gabon says with all of that, we need him right now. And I love that in this moment, Gabon tells Loki, dude, it's time to tell the truth. You gotta tell it to at least Hajradin. Even if it's a bad day to relive, you need to clear the air. With all the pride and all the sadness you may carry from that day, you've got to tell the truth to give us a chance to trust you. So that officially kicks off some Loki backstory that we've been desperately grasping for. It sends us 14 years in the past. Loki and Yarul have been summoned to the castle for some reason. I'd like to note here that Loki seems to be holding yet another different weapon. We've obviously seen Ragnir, which is the giant hammer he used to strike the tree and cause the fire on Branch 8. But we also saw when he was a kid that he was using a weapon very similar to Kaido's style of weapon, which did open up a lot of theories about Kaido potentially being related to Hajradin and Loki, but we'll talk about that in a different video. It's interesting that Loki and Yarul have this conversation about how the children are getting weak. Loki, of course, is on the side that the giants need to be a warrior race, and Yarul seems to dip into that side quite a bit, but when it comes to his great-granddaughter, he is all for them being pacifists. I think this conversation is key to what we're about to see on the next couple pages of this chapter. They begin to hear some screaming behind the door that they're walking towards, so Loki kicks it in just to find his father, King Harold, being attacked by a ton of the giant soldiers. In this scene, King Harold is shadowed, but we could see his subordinates all stabbing him through with weapons that are incredibly similar to the weapon that Whitebeard used. And interestingly enough, in this scene, besides King Harold being shadowed, everybody else looks normal. There's been quite a bit of conversation of there potentially being a Domi Reversi moment within the throne room that led to Loki potentially having to kill King Harold. But instead we see the Elbafian warriors seemingly of their right minds running him through with blades. But then we get the scene that I think everybody is going to be talking about with this chapter. We get Shanks and Gabon soaking in a hot spring together, having a casual conversation. And of course, within this image, we can see Shanks with his left arm fully intact, and of course there is a tattoo on that left arm. Now, it's very important to point out here that this tattoo is not the same mark that we saw on Sommer's arm. And of course, the entire One Piece community is theorizing that the mark we saw on Sommer's arm is the abyssal marks that was spoken about between Killingham and Gunko. That's the mark that you need to travel between the abyss and gives you seemingly the direct connection to Emu. It's so crucial to note that all of that is just theoretical. At the end of the day, Sommers could simply just be a guy with tattoos, or those tattoos could mean something completely different. But either way, this tattoo that we're seeing here on Shanks' arm is a different design. We can't just jump to the conclusion that this is in fact an abyss mark, but I do still feel this is some kind of marking from the world government on Shanks. This leads me to believe that there's different tiers of the abyssal marks. If this is some sort of abyssal mark, obviously Shanks is not on the same level that the Holy Knights and then the Gorosei are. Shanks at this point obviously is not being held down by the world government, but you could assume that maybe through this mark, they can still monitor his positions. And of course that leads us to one of the fan favorite theories of One Piece currently, that Shanks gave up his arm to that Sea King to remove this tattoo or marking. And don't get me wrong, I love that theory and I think there's still a lot of credence to it. We just have to remember that these are all theories and none of this is fact just yet. But it is interesting regardless that Shanks does in fact have some kind of tattoo on his left arm. And of course, I would love to hear you guys' thoughts on what that tattoo means in the comments. We get an absolutely hilarious moment with Ripley busting through the window and scaring the two of them. And then of course, Ripley asking Shanks to tell her some stories about Gabon from back in the day, and he goes to talk about all the fun that Gabon used to have at all the different ports they stopped at. Shanks is really trying to get himself in trouble in this panel. It's interesting to note that Shanks says that he got to meet King Harold while he was in Marijois. And from the information that Shamrock gave us when we found out that Shamrock was Shanks' twin, Shanks has only been to Marijois one time. So when he was there, King Harold was also there. What do you guys think they were doing there? But unfortunately, the day that he's having this conversation with Gabon is the same day that King Harold gets murdered. And not only that, Yarul gets a sword through his head, and then a shadowy figure gets away with the legendary devil fruit that Elbaf has been holding. Going back one page, I would like to put a little bit of focus on who it is who is attacking King Harold. Like I said earlier, it seems to be regular giant warriors. And in the page before that, Loki and Yarul were talking about the differences between weak giants and strong giants. We know that King Harold's actions to try to make the giant race more pacifistic has led to a bit of a divide within the giant culture. Many giants still believe in the old way of being a warrior race, and conversely, many giants from the newer generation believe in being pacifists and growing the culture of Elbaf instead of being a warrior race. Of course, King Harold was working to open up the world of Elbaf to trade with the rest of the world. We know that of course came with some negative consequences because that means you end up working with the world government. And of course, they're not out for the better for your country. They just want your resources. And unfortunately, more specifically, their children. So I believe that in this moment, a coup was formed against King Harold. The people who killed King Harold were inherently the soldiers who promised to protect him. When Loki walked in there and saw what was happening to his father, he massacred those soldiers because they were murdering his father. And in the process, Yarul took an arrow to the knee, a sword to the head. But who was it who was truly inciting this coup? Well, I believe that's the shadowy figure who ended up getting away with this devil fruit. And I would assume that shadowy figure is more than likely a holy knight. That holy knight is the one who initially put the pentagram within the castle so they would be able to teleport there and back more easily. And I believe that holy knight was the one slowly stoking the flames of rebellion against King Harold. Interestingly enough, on the final page of this chapter, it takes us even farther back in time. We are now looking at 109 years ago. We get to see a panel of a young Dorian Bragi back in their warring days. And unfortunately, we see just how ruthless these giant pirates were. And most specifically, King Harold. 109 years ago was the day that King Harold ascended the throne. He was 45 in giant years and only 15 years old in human years. For all intents and purposes, that means a crazy tyrant of a child just gained the throne of Elbaf. And yet, the entire story that we've been told of King Harold was how he was a pacifist. He tore his horns off to denounce his ancient giant blood and his warring tendencies. But the first time we get a true flashback of him, we see him being a true tyrant. So what was it that made King Harold change? Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to wait for the next chapter to find that out. As of now, all we know about King Harold is he was a scumbag who ended up being a pacifist. An interesting piece to point out within this panel is the fact that they actually gave us a direct comparison to how human years relate to giant years. This kind of ties back into the theory that's been going around the One Piece community about time moving differently in Elbaf. And there's been a lot of speculation as to whether time moves faster or it moves slower, but after this chapter, we got some confirmation that it seems to move slower. During the bath scene with Shanks and Gabon, Gabon mentions, hey, how long has it been since I've seen you? 3 or 4 years? And then Shanks corrects him saying, dude, it's been 10 years since the captain died. So the question here is time perceived to go slower on Elbaf, or is it actually going slower on Elbaf? In my opinion, I think it depends on if you're a giant or some other race. Giants feel like time is moving normally for them on Elbaf, but a human might feel like time is moving significantly slower because they're so much smaller. It's kind of like the concept of when you see an ant looking up at a human walking, and a lot of times in the show, they display the human walking very, very slow in crazy big steps. I feel like it's the same kind of concept on all of Elbaf. Since Elbaf is inherently massive, every single thing is scaled up. For a human, everything might be seemingly moving slower when it's actually moving at the same pace as everything else. But either way, this opens up some big questions. Is it potentially 3 times slower because Harold is 45, but that's only 15 in human years? Or is that just something to give us a basic comparison to human years versus giant years? Am I looking too much into it? You guys let me know in the comments. Either way, I would absolutely say that time seems to move slower on Elbaf, which leads me to believe that when the Straw Hats do finally get off of Elbaf, the whole world will have changed. Emu already teleported in saying that Marie Joie is on fire. The last we heard about Marie Joie, the revolutionaries were holding a siege there and the Celestials were getting a little bit uneasy because of the lack of food they've been getting. But at this point, it's on fire, and the Holy Knights teleported in to send Shamrock back there so he could help bring the peace. There's a ton of disrest going on in Marie Joie, but I genuinely believe once we get out of here, we're going to find out a lot more than we think has gone down in all of the world. Going back to Yamato's pilgrimage, all of this could be taking place at a normal rate outside of Elbaf. So even though the Straw Hats may have only been on Elbaf for about a week by the time we get off of it, Yamato's entire pilgrimage around Wano could have already happened. And this could help set up all of the Straw Hats Grand Fleet members to be prepared to sail on Marie Joie once we leave Elbaf to go back to Marie Joie. I'm still convinced that immediately after all the events that go down on Elbaf happen, the Straw Hats are going to be leaving Elbaf and running to Marie Joie to help save Colin and potentially some other kids that the Holy Knights did successfully get away with. I still think Colin makes the most sense because he's Scopper Gabon's son. Narratively, he is the most important child that we've met so far. And Scopper Gabon being motivated to hop on the Straw Hat ship and sail with them all the way back to Marie Joie also gives us a good opportunity for Gabon to help train our Straw Hats more in the ways of hockey. Because of course at this point we all know that the Straw Hats need some type of level up to be able to deal with the enemies that we have coming forward. It was a horrible day indeed for Loki, but this was a fantastic day for us One Piece fans. Again, these chapters are cooking. I feel like chapter 1153 is going to give us so much meat of this backstory that we've been waiting for all of Elbaf. It's going to be fantastic. It took us a little bit longer to get to this backstory than I thought it would, but either way, I'm so happy that it's happening. And in classic One Piece fashion, it makes sense. The big bad has now appeared on Elbaf, and it is bad, really bad. So we're at the moment where the fight really needs to start. And of course, that's a brilliant moment to give us a quick flashback to give us all the context that we need to move forward in this story. I can't wait to figure out what it was that changed Harold's mind. I believe that it had to have something to do with A, having children, or B, meeting a woman, because those two things will humble you in a heartbeat. If you've made it this far in the video, then please drop a comment and let me know what your theories are moving forward in One Piece. If you would like to see my uncut reaction to this chapter and a theory crafting session immediately after, that is up on the Patreon below. We do live streams for One Piece every Sunday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so if you would like to come read the chapter and discuss it with me live, I would love to have you there. Lastly, consider joining the Discord down below so you can talk about One Piece and other anime with me in there all week long. And before you get out of here, make sure to tell the people you love them, touch some grass, drink some water, and I will see you guys for the next chapter of One Piece.